Gauss has sort of spoken to you a little bit about, the benefits of really that next step in soil amelioration, going a bit deeper, doing this soil re-engineering. And you can see there that in so doing, we do actually unlock the absolute excellent genetic potential of our current varieties, our excellent agronomic potential, and you can see the result of that. But I guess the work that we've been doing is a part of what we call in brief, the post-amelioration project. And it's really about trying to understand how we actually do maximise the benefits when we do ameliorate these soils. It's about trying to understand how we manage the risks. And we're looking at a whole range of aspects, including those interactions with herbicides. We're looking at how amelioration actually impacts on all those aspects of crop protection, like soil-borne pathogens and pests with Daniel and Sarah, weeds with Catherine, and sort of trying to say, okay, if we're going to do this work, if we're going to spend all this money, we're going to make sure that we get the maximum benefit. So the little bit I'm going to talk to you today is really just a sort of one little sub component of a big lot of work that we're undertaking. And you can just see there a one-pass spader seeding system that was operating up at Northampton in this past season. So we can get that to move forward. Perhaps I do need to be here. So it's a bit of a conundrum when it comes to crop establishment on ameliorated soils, because if you think back to kind of that 2007, 2009 period where we really started to, I guess, get some different machinery in, we started to ameliorate these soils. One of the big initial drivers for it was overcoming water repellents, and we saw results like this, really stark differences where we'd ameliorated these soils and actually had massive improvements in establishment. And that obviously, just in those few pictures alone, sort of sums up why the adoption became so great and the potential benefits. But at the same time, as we went further along, I guess, and we sort of pushed these things onto other soils, we also found that we would have some real crop establishment difficulties. And there's actually a whole host of reasons why that can be the case. So obviously one of the main things is we really soften and loosen and lose the structure of these soils. They become quite unconsolidated. And so seed depth and placement is actually, it's difficult to control seed depth. It's obviously seeders, tractors sink, and some seeders handle it better than others. Furrow infill, occurs as well, which just adds to that problem of depth. Again, an unconsolidated soil moves around, and and that can actually obviously also take pre-emergent herbicides into the furrow too, and further increase that problem. Herbicide damage, thanks Bevan for that. That was really good having that introduction. And you can see there, Tom Edwards is actually doing his PhD on this topic around herbicide damage on ameliorated soils, and that's his sort of conceptual diagram there, I guess, around all the factors, and even that's not quite all of them, but that's a lot of the factors that can impact on the bioavailability of herbicides. And you can see that there's a massive number of factors, and soil amelioration certainly does change quite a few of those, and impacts on that bioavailability of herbicide and potential for crop damage. And I think more and more we're even starting to understand now that there's actually herbicide residues too that are actually potentially at times, if you're unlucky, having an impact on our crops too, and that's something that's, I guess, we're starting to try and understand a little bit more as well. Soil crusting is another thing. A lot of you may have seen this on some of our sandplain soils. We bring up just enough clay, we've buried that organic matter. Again, we've resulted in an unconsolidated soil, and we end up with what is actually, to us, seems like a very weak crust, but to a cereal plant trying to emerge from depth and push its leaves through that crust, really quite a difficult conundrum. Rapid soil drying is something that I don't think people always recognise, but again, we've removed all the cover from these soils. There's no shading. We're often, where I'm from, based in Geraldton, we obviously can be quite warm at seeding time, and these soils can be drying down quite rapidly from the surface. And there are potentially even other factors that we don't even fully understand that can impact on crop establishment. So what are we really wanting to aim for when we think about reliable crop establishment on ameliorated soils? We want that establishment to be rapid in the soil while it's moist and get the crop up and away. We want that crop there to help cover the soil, prevent any further erosion events. We want an ability to emerge from depth. We'll certainly always be doing our best not to sow it too deep, but the reality is sometimes it will happen. We want that ability to chase moisture if needed. If we are in that sort of situation of a drying profile, we may need to chase moisture. We may actually deliberately want to push a bit deeper, make sure we can get that seed imbibed and actually germinate and emerging. We do want ability to penetrate that surface crust or to prevent that surface crust. And trafficability and seedbed firming, to what extent do we need to do it? Can we do too much of it? How much do we need to do? And obviously this issue about safe soil applied herbicide options. So that's work that we've got doing a lot of work on and continuing to do. And we want high early vigour, that high early vigour, early ground cover, get the soil protected, and start using the light and water. And obviously sometimes, in some cases, people have done a good job of sort of modifying seeding equipment or in building dedicated and effective seeding equipment for ameliorated soils where they're doing a lot of hectares. So one of the things that we did this year was we collaborated with Dr. Greg Grubetsky and got a little bit of seed with some long coleoptile wheat, because it was always something that I'd thought about for a few years in terms of saying, well, that really could be a solution. It just helps ensure establishment with seeding depth. So just a little bit of quick background, but I mean, really this, done the same thing as Gauss. So really this is about actually different genetics in terms of the dwarfing genes, which just gives you a longer coleoptile. So you can see from that table there, the dwarfing genes that we sort of used, that were predominantly used in about 70% of the world's wheat varieties, were ones that sort of gave you that, obviously, that semi-dwarf sort of stature, but it also did result in shorter coleoptiles. And there are alternative dwarfing genes, and the ones that were used are actually a dwarfing gene from durum wheat that actually you still get a semi-dwarf sort of stature, but you do get a longer coleoptile, and you can see there the difference from the short coleoptiles there. And there are other varieties around where been selected just within the germplasm for longer coleoptiles, which sit somewhere in between the two. So it does mean that you can potentially sow deeper and still get reliable establishment. So in the experiment that we only had seed enough for one experiment, which was up at Ogilvie between Northampton and Benue, and we had mace, basically short coleoptile mace with this RHT18 alternative dwarfing gene, which gave it longer coleoptiles. Scepter and Caliber in there as sort of commercial checks. Unfortunately, we couldn't get all the seed from the same source, so our Scepter seed was very, very large, which certainly would have been an advantage for it. It was about 50-something milligrams, I think. It was basically round. We had no-till and spaded in terms of the amelioration, 2 seeding depths you can see there, the typical seeding depth, and then down at 10 to 12 centimetres. And we had 2 sort of target plant densities as well as part of the experimental sort of factorial, if you like. So these are the results from Ogilvie for wheat density there, and I've just shown there the decline across the different varieties, the different lines with deeper sowing. So really the take-home message there was that, with that longer coleoptile trait, you had 21% reduction in crop establishment compared to a 55% reduction without it for those near isogenic lines. So the bars on there, I should just note, are the actual LSDs, so you can sort of have a look at what's significant for yourself. And Caliber and Scepter are very similar in that instance. So one of the things that I guess was quite notable at the site, it wasn't a particularly weedy site in the scheme of things, but definitely where we sowed deep with a shorter coleoptile plant that didn't have the density and didn't compete well with weeds, we certainly saw this big increase in weed biomass for the mace sown deep. And that's actually been consistent across a lot of the sites with these long coleoptile wheats this year across the nation, and so we're going to sort of try and pull some of that data together. In terms of grain yield, look, just an exceptional year at Ogilvy. I don't think anyone, I mean, Tomo might correct me, but I don't think we've had a softer finish, have we, Tomo, really, in the Northern Ag region? And yeah, so pushing 5 tonne sort of average wheat yields up at Ogilvy is what dreams are made of, I guess. And you can see there that basically for everything except for sort of that maize sown deep, we really were pushing really good yields. And even that, I mean, even 4 tonnes a good yield. So yeah, this is just to show you a little bit about how things looked through the season. So you can just see there on your left, on the plot on the left is the long coleoptile mace establishing a bit better than its neighbour, the shorter coleoptile mace. You can see some impacts there of that furrow infill that we spoke about. So that's an added test. And then as the season went on, you can see how that difference was sustained in terms of the crop density. So the other aspect of, I guess, the treatment structures and the way the statistics worked out is these seeding depth per se didn't actually have a significant interaction with amelioration, so they were more separate effects, if you like, but they still both were significant in terms of the variety by amelioration interaction. And you can see there that, the amelioration response was excellent, up to 25%, up to 1.1, 1.2 tonne per hectare yield increase, despite a very, very good season. So again, the amelioration, which was spading and ripping in this case, ripping and spading in that order rather, was very, very good. One of the other things that we wanted to look at is these one-pass amelioration and seeding systems. The advantage of these systems is that they really are excellent for just getting the crop into the soil while it's wet, getting it up and away, and they actually have quite reduced erosion because you end up with that strong furrowing of the soil surface, and then that's sustained until the crop's actually up and sort of binding the soil and covering the soil. You can see there, this system just has a hopper up on top of the spader that leads down to pipes, and you've got those flexible boots in front of the tyre rollers at the back. And Wayne's attractive legs there are for scale going through the back there. Sorry, Wayno. So this is our little mini version here on the left of a one-pass, a sort of a roller seeder that we can tow behind our spader and achieve one pass at a plot scale. And that's sort of very similar to what, I think this is Brett Wars on the right here, very similar system with a modified flexi-coil with just those very simple seeding boots in front of the press wheels. And that's what he uses for all his moldboard sort of country in the first year. There is going to be some modifications to our system for next year with the capacity to put a bit more hydraulic pressure and pull those, get those bit more pressure on those press wheels and move those seeding boots down if we need to. So the structure for this experiment was we had our control, our no-till with knife point seeding. We had the typical sort of way most amelioration's done, and it will continue to be done a lot this way, undoubtedly. Ripped, then spade, rolled separately, and then seeded with knife points, seeded with pretty much a regular seeder in a 2-pass operation. Then we've got a 1-pass, rip, then spade, roll and seed all in the 1 pass. Broadcast, we've also got this other treatment, which we'd actually tried in a single treatment at a trial. We've got Easter Coragen last year, and it kind of worked well, but just went with a high seed rate, then spaded it in. It has been done a little bit by growers before, but it's very much a niche sort of treatment just to improve our, partly to improve our statistical capacity in the experiment. And then we had the 2 varieties, Caliber and Scepter, and 3 target populations. So low, there's our sort of typical seeding rate. We just adjusted our seeding rate based on the seed size of the different varieties. Medium is actually targeting close to 180 plants per metre squared, and high is this ridiculous, roughly around 200 kilos per hectare of seed in order to try and get enough seed up when you broadcast it and spade it. Yep. So we've got 2 sites for this, so Cunderdin. So here, the percentages that you see on the spade and 1 pass, the third set of bars along at the 3 different seeding rates, those percentage increases are relative to the spade and 2 pass. So this 1 pass operation was giving us somewhere between 30 to 50% improvement in early crop establishment. You can see there that the broadcast spade really didn't establish very well at all. But yeah, it's interesting to see how that comes through in yield. So that was the Cunderdin site. This is up at the Ogilvie site, and again, even bigger benefits from the spading and 1 pass system in terms of getting the crop up and away early, but even poorer outcome for that broadcast spade approach. And look, the no-till did okay. That site is a little bit repellent, so it was certainly a bit low at the standard seeding rate, but upping the seeding rate got things up to a really good level of plant density. In terms of yield, again, we sort of pushing on the boundaries of what the yield potential for that site, that sort of soil, probably sand plain soil at Ogilvie ever will be, in terms of almost getting up towards 6 tonnes per hectare for our spading treatments. And you can see there that really it was just ameliorated or not was the key. The actual, whether it was a 2 pass or a 1 pass spader system, we sort of got an increase in 1.2 tonnes per hectare of yield, about 27%. But you can see with the broadcast spade, it actually caught up a lot. So we had a season, obviously, where we had mature heads at one point pretty much, and yet we still had a whole bunch of green tillers, and they all went through and actually filled grain and yielded. So it really did have the opportunity, that broadcast stuff, to catch up a lot this year, and that wouldn't necessarily be the case every season. But one of the things that was observed was, as was pointed out earlier, our reliance on pre-emergent herbicides is just huge for weed control. So this is an example of a grower's 1 pass spader seeding this last season, and this was an area where they really did struggle without that pre-emergent. They really did struggle for effectiveness and really did have a major weed blowout. So this has actually become a research question for us, that if we're going to use this 1 pass system, what are our strategies for managing weeds? But, you know, later on in the program, this is also spader seed, and then this is quite clean. So they had the opportunity of a cleaner paddock, an additional knockdown, and it worked incredibly well, and they were incredibly happy with that result on what they considered quite poor sand plain soil up to this point. So in summary, I mean, in terms of crop establishment, the rules, the same rules sort of apply in terms of a high quality seed source, clean, high germination percentage, higher protein if possible, high kernel weight. All those things will actually help. Safe pre-emergent herbicides is just critical. I think Tom spoke at this event last year and will speak again in the future as he continues work in this area, but that's it really using really safe products is vital. Increasing the seed rates is an option, and certainly when these well-adapted, high-vigor, long coleoptile wheats come available, they are just an insurance policy. We don't necessarily want to seed too deep, but if it happens, these things will actually help ensure that we get good establishment. So I'd just like to acknowledge the project. This is a DPIR GRDC co-investment project, all the research staff and the collaboration with Greg. Thank you very much.